Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be looking at the psychology of crime and redemption in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Mm,
And we're really going to try to use excerpts from the book itself to get inside the head of a criminal,
right.
looking at their motivations and, consequences and all those big questions that Dostoevsky brings up.
Yeah.
And, one of the interesting things about Dostoevsky
Hmm.
is that he himself actually served time in a Siberian prison.
Oh, wow.
It was a brutal experience, and it really must have shaped his writing.
Yeah. That personal connection does really add a layer of authenticity to Crime and Punishment.
Right.
And, his own experience with suffering kind of gives weight to his exploration of these themes.
It really makes you think about how our own experiences shape our perspectives.
Absolutely.
So let's meet our main character, Rodion Raskolnikov. He's this poor ex-student in St. Petersburg,
Hmm.
and he commits this shocking crime, the murder of an elderly pawnbroker.
And not just the pawnbroker, but her sister, Lizaveta, too.
Oh.
Who walks in at the worst possible moment.
Oh, no.
And that unplanned act really underscores the impulsive, chaotic nature of the crime.
Right.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets interesting. Raskolnikov isn't just some desperate thief. He's got this idea of himself. He sees himself as intellectually superior, and he justifies the murder with this twisted philosophy,
Yeah.
believing that he's above conventional morality.
It's that whole extraordinary man philosophy, right? That's really central to understanding Raskolnikov's whole psychology.
Yeah.
He believes that certain individuals are exempt from ordinary moral constraints and that they have the right to transgress for some greater good.
It's pretty messed up. Yeah.
But even with all these attempts to rationalize what he's done, he can't escape. He becomes consumed by guilt and paranoia. Dostoevsky paints this really vivid picture of his mental deterioration.
Yeah.
Like he wipes his bloody hands on red brocade thinking it'll hide the stains.
Wow.
Like it just shows how illogical his thinking has become. Right. It's such a great detail, because it perfectly encapsulates that internal conflict raging within him. He so desperately wants to believe in his own intellectual justifications, but he can't escape those bloody consequences of what he did.
Yeah. It's a real push and pull. And, this is contrasted with the crushing reality of poverty going on around him. We're introduced to Marmeladov, a destitute alcoholic,
Yeah.
and his daughter Sonia, who's forced into prostitution
Right.
to support her family.
It's heartbreaking. But do you think their stories serve a larger purpose in the novel?
Oh, absolutely. I think they really represent the harsh social conditions of 19th century St. Petersburg, and they show how poverty can really erode a person's choices, and their morality.
Yeah. It pushes them to do desperate things.
Yeah, I found Marmeladov's speech about seeking redemption for the drunkards and the children of shame, really poignant. It reveals his shame, but also this yearning for forgiveness.
Yeah. And Sonia, despite her circumstances, embodies this unwavering faith and compassion. Right.
And her living conditions, they're described in vivid detail. It's such a stark contrast to Raskolnikov's intellectualized world.
Yeah. It really makes you wonder, does poverty breed a different kind of morality?
It's a great question. It makes you think about how our definition of morality changes based on our circumstances.
So speaking of morality, let's talk about Porfiry Petrovich, the detective assigned to the case. He's incredibly cunning.
Yeah, he's sharp.
He engages in this psychological game of cat and mouse with Raskolnikov.
It's interesting because Porfiry represents this kind of intellectual sparring.
Right.
He's not just trying to catch a killer. He really wants to understand the mind behind the crime. And he uses psychological tactics, preying on Raskolnikov's guilt and paranoia to draw out a confession.
There's this one point where Porfiry offers a psychological explanation for the crime, and contrasts it with the simpler motivations of another suspect.
Right.
Why do you think that's so important? Well, I think it shows that Porfiry recognizes the complexity of Raskolnikov's motives. He understands that this isn't just a simple crime of passion or greed.
Right.
There's something much deeper going on, There's this philosophical underpinning to it, this twisted ideology that drives him.
Dostoevsky knows how to keep us on our toes.
Oh, yeah.
Then we have Svidrigailov, a morally ambiguous character who's got this connection to Raskolnikov's sister Dunya. He makes unwanted advances on her, and she resists.
Yeah.
And there's this intense scene where she shoots at him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Svidrigailov is fascinating. He really embodies this duality of human nature. He commits acts of kindness, but then he also displays this disturbing obsession with Dunya and his death, by suicide. It's shrouded in mystery, and it leaves us to question his true intentions.
Yeah.
Like, can a person be both good and bad?
Right.
Can we ever really know someone's heart?
And if someone like Svidrigailov can seek redemption, what does that say about the possibility of change for anyone? These are some really thought-provoking questions. We're going to dive deeper into those.
Yeah, I can't wait.
But before we move on, I want to touch on one more crucial element. Sonia's unwavering faith and her attempts to guide Raskolnikov towards confession and repentance.
Sonia's faith is such a powerful force in this novel.
Right.
It represents hope and the possibility of redemption, even for someone as troubled as Raskolnikov. Yeah.
And that scene where she reads the story of Lazarus to him.
Oh, so symbolic.
Right. It alludes to the idea of resurrection, both spiritual and physical.
It suggests that even when faced with death and despair, there's always potential for renewal.
And ultimately, I think that's what Dostoevsky is exploring in Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
The possibility of change, the struggle for redemption, and the power of human connection when we're suffering.
Powerful stuff.
It's heavy stuff, but it feels incredibly relevant even today.
Absolutely.
If Raskolnikov's crime was motivated by this desire to be extraordinary, does society's definition of success actually contribute to destructive behavior?
It's an interesting question. Does the pressure to achieve greatness, to stand out from the crowd, sometimes lead us down a dangerous path?
Do we risk losing sight of our moral compass in that pursuit of ambition? If so, is there a better way to define our worth and purpose?
Right. A path that leads to fulfillment without sacrificing our humanity.
It's something I'm still grappling with.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of Dostoevsky's work. Yeah. He doesn't offer easy answers. Yeah. He presents us with these complex questions, and he makes us grapple with the ambiguities of morality and the human condition.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
We were just talking about Sonia's influence on Raskolnikov.
Right.
Which leads us to, his eventual confession. And he's sentenced to hard labor in Siberia.
Wow.
But even in this harsh prison camp, he doesn't really repent right away.
Right. He's still clinging to his pride and that extraordinary man philosophy.
Like, those ideas are really ingrained in him. It makes you think, is genuine change even possible for someone who's so arrogant?
That's the question, isn't it? Can we overcome our deepest beliefs, even when they've led us to do such terrible things?
And the descriptions of the Siberian prison camp are just brutal.
Yeah.
Harsh conditions.
Yeah.
Threat of violence. Loss of freedom. It's like a physical manifestation of his inner turmoil.
It's like the setting mirrors his psychological state, Like the city itself was closing in on him before.
Right.
Now it's this whole prison camp.
Yeah. And it's in this suffering that he finally starts to confront his darkness. Not just the physical hardship, but the mental and spiritual anguish.
It forces him to reevaluate everything.
Do you think Sonia's letters to his family play a part in this?
Oh, absolutely. They're this constant reminder of her faith in him. Even when everyone else gives up on him, she believes he can change.
Her letters are like a lifeline.
Exactly. A beacon of hope in all that despair.
It's her belief in him that keeps him going.
And it's through her example that he starts to understand things like humility and forgiveness.
One thing that stood out to me was how Raskolnikov finds solace in hard labor. That seems kind of counterintuitive.
It might, but it speaks to this human need for atonement.
Right.
He wants to find a way to balance the scales,
To work off his guilt.
Exactly, through physical exhaustion and suffering.
And Dostoevsky doesn't portray his change of heart as this big dramatic moment.
No.
It's this slow process
Gradual.
of confronting his pride, his guilt.
And finally taking responsibility.
It's really insightful how he shows that transformation takes time.
It's a journey of self-discovery, peeling away layers of denial and self-deception.
And it all comes back to that scene with Sonia and the story of Lazarus.
Oh, yes. So
resurrection, new life after death. It suggests that anyone can find redemption.
Even someone as lost as Raskolnikov.
But Dostoevsky leaves it open-ended, right?
He does.
We don't know for sure if he's truly redeemed.
That ambiguity is intentional. Dostoevsky wants us to think about it,
To wrestle with those questions.
To consider forgiveness and change as real experiences.
And it makes you reflect on your own life.
Right.
Our struggles with guilt and the need for redemption.
Do we all have that capacity for change?
Even after we mess up.
That's for each of us to decide Dostoevsky doesn't give us the answers.
He shows us how complex life is.
And he challenges us to find our own meaning.
This has really been eye-opening.
It has.
The psychology of a criminal mind, the reality of poverty, the potential for redemption.
And we've just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to Crime and Punishment.
So much. It's a book that keeps giving.
Like there's the setting of St. Petersburg. It's almost like another character.
Absolutely. It adds to the atmosphere.
The crowded streets, the heat, the feeling of decay. It all reflects what's going on inside Raskolnikov.
It's like the city is closing in on him.
Reflecting his guilt and paranoia.
Right. And then there's the contrast between the poverty and the wealth.
Yeah.
Like with Raskolnikov and Marmeladov versus Luzhin and Svidrigailov.
It shows the social inequalities.
And how wealth and status come at a cost.
And those parts where Marmeladov talks about Sonia and what she has to do.
Heartbreaking.
It's a reminder of the choices people are forced to make.
And it makes us question our own role in these injustices.
It's like Dostoevsky saying, are you paying attention?
Are you doing anything about it?
It's uncomfortable. But he wants us to think about these things.
To examine our values.
And he gives us these characters who are so complex.
Like Raskolnikov. He's a murderer, but he also shows compassion.
Like when he gives money to Marmeladov's widow.
It's a contradiction.
He does something terrible and then something selfless.
It's human nature.
We're all capable of good and bad.
And Dostoevsky doesn't tell us what to think.
He leaves us to wrestle with it.
With the ambiguity of morality and the possibility of change.
And that's what makes Crime and Punishment so powerful.
It's timeless.
It stays with you.
And it makes you think.
It's amazing how he does that, weaves those social critiques into this story that's so personal and psychological.
Yeah.
Speaking of personal, we talk a lot about Raskolnikov, but the other characters too.
Right.
They're more than just foils for him.
Oh, for sure. Each character represents a different side of the human experience. Different ways of dealing with those moral dilemmas.
Right, and they're all trying to find meaning in this world that feels so chaotic.
Absolutely. Like their struggles reflect a larger societal crisis.
Yeah, like Marmeladov. His alcoholism is so tragic.
It is.
It comes from poverty and despair.
But it makes you think about personal responsibility, too, right? And the systems that contribute to these destructive cycles.
Like, how do we judge people who are struggling?
Yeah.
Do we offer compassion, or do we just see them as failures?
It's a challenge to look past those judgments.
And then there's Sonia. She's so compassionate and selfless.
Even when things are so hard for her.
She chooses to love and forgive.
Her faith is so powerful.
It shows that hope and redemption are always possible.
Even in the darkest times.
That scene where she reads the story of Lazarus.
Ah.
It's all about resurrection and renewal.
It's about the power of belief.
Even when everything seems lost, faith can offer a way out.
A path towards healing.
And it's interesting how Sonia's path is so different from Svidrigailov's. Like his attempts at doing good deeds, it's almost like a bargain.
Yeah, he wants to erase his guilt without really facing it.
He's such a morally ambiguous character.
He makes you question everything you thought you knew about good and evil.
And even Porfiry the detective. He's not just a smart investigator.
No, he's genuinely curious about the human mind.
He wants to understand even the dark parts.
He knows that Raskolnikov's crime comes from a deeper place.
Like he's trying to reach him through their intellectual debates.
It's like a form of therapy.
It's amazing how Dostoevsky makes every character so complex.
They all add something to the story.
Offering different perspectives on crime and punishment and redemption. It feels like Crime and Punishment isn't about finding answers.
Yeah, it's about embracing the questions.
It's about thinking critically and challenging what we believe.
Recognizing that our choices are all connected.
This has been quite a journey.
It has.
We've explored so much.
The dark side of the mind, poverty, the possibility of change.
It's made us confront some hard truths.
About ourselves and the world.
That's the power of Dostoevsky.
He makes us think about the big questions.
The things that make us human. I think we can both agree that this book stays with you.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes you keep questioning and searching.
And finding your own meaning.
I'm ready to read it again.
Me too. Every time you learn something new.
So to our listener, we encourage you to explore Crime and Punishment.
Discover its power for yourself.
Don't be afraid to get lost in it.
That's where the real journey begins.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.